Hello, 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 and welcome to this edition of the Jolly Heretic. I have such a special guest for you today, and that is Philosophic Cat, with whom I wish to discuss the issue of traditionalist philosophy. And while I sign into the old entropy, I'm going to ask Cat to introduce herself. So, Cat, over to you.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ed. I'm very happy to be here. I've watched your show for a while, since you were just starting out, actually. My story is I'm kind of known as like the Evola girl within the right-wing circles. I make a documentary series on revolt against the modern world, the next episode of which should be out within the month. I've kind of been involved in this scene for basically my entire adult life, kind of since my late teens, really, and have sort of transitioned from being, originally very politically active to kind of withdrawing from the political sphere and focusing more on the spiritual and the metaphysical.
I see. Well, cheers, everybody. Cheers, Andrew Quinn. Cheers, Ibian666. Cheers, Carlos Acosta. Cheers, Mr. Godfrey, Slanger, Hurligan, Gurligan, Capis, Skoll, Proust, Saludo, and all that stuff. And welcome to the Jolly Heretic. We are, of course, an online public house that meets on Mondays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. UK time, 2 p.m. New York, in which we discuss based science, based philosophy, based history, and everything else which is increasingly excluded from our woke joke universities. And very rare at the saloon bar at the Jolly Heretic, we have a lady. I think this is the fourth lady, or possibly the fifth lady that has ever appeared. No, sixth lady that has ever appeared on the Jolly Heretic, and excellent, superb. And so, I do hope that they're not live streaming upstairs. I do want that made quite clear. It's gone down to nothing on the thing. So good. So the thing that I really wanted to talk about is this whole issue. Oh yes, cheers everybody. JD, she's a hot one, says JDG. Okay, well there you go. She's a female woman lady, exactly, and we can say that now. We can legally say that now on the old Twitter, because of developments recently. We can now say that a woman has no Y chromosome. And so cheers to that. So yes, cheers everybody. Cheers Catty Paul, Slanger Var, and cheers. Okay, now the thing I really wanted to discuss with you was Julius Evola. People like Keith Woods and whatever, they go on about Julius Evola while he thinks that you need to go. He goes on to people, they talk on the alt-right and so on about Julius Evola, what a marvelous man he was. And Jonathan Bowden, who everyone says is fantastic, he goes on and on about Julius Evola. And so I tried to read Julius Evola, and I must say I found it headache-inducingly boring. And badly written and turgid and just like worse than Oswald Spengler, who is also badly written and turgid. And so I thought to myself, it would be good to have somebody who could do all the hard work and read Evola for me, and so I could see via that person vicariously if he made sense. And I should also say that I had Dugin on this show, and I came to the conclusion that traditionalism was just sort of postmodernism for right-wing people. So I come at it rather skeptically. So I'm saying my hypothesis is that this Julius Evola guy is just word salad and a load of old bollocks, and a way of dressing up right-wing instincts in a profound-sounding way. Is there more to it than that?
I would say there's a lot more to it. And I suppose, first of all, we almost have to define like what we mean by right-wing, because when we talk about right wing in terms of, the modern political dichotomy, it means a very specific thing. And that's not necessarily what it meant to Julius Evola. So from the perspective of traditionalism, the right wing is that which is trying to chart a pathway back to this primordial tradition, whereas the left wing is this progressive, degenerate, deconstructivist movement. And it's the left wing that is kind of arising as an element of chaos in reaction to what is traditional and eternal. So, to put it very simply, well, as simply as I can, because it is a complex subject, traditionalism is a school of philosophy that centers on the premise that there was once this primordial spiritual tradition that was revealed to mankind back in a golden age. And this primordial tradition is one of symbols, and it shows the pathway to recover and realize our divine potential. And from this original tradition, all of the different religious traditions sprung up around the world like branches coming off of a tree trunk. And each of these religions contains a facet of the primordial tradition. These religions accommodate, both the simple believers as well as those who want to pursue an esoteric and initiatic path and learn that deep language of the symbolism and seek that pathway to the transcendent. So what Evola is doing is he is looking for the common threads among the world's spiritual traditions and then trying to tease out, well, what are these pure facets of the primordial tradition? Where can we find them? And
can I just interrupt there? If you have any questions, if you have any questions for Philosophic Cat on the issue of traditionalism or Evola, please send them in, and we will, of course, answer them today. 1. 2, someone said in the chat that I haven't read Guénon. I haven't read. No, I have. I have read René Guénon, and René Guénon is well written. When Guénon writes well, he's readable. This Evola guy that I object to. Good. Okay, sorry for interrupting. Carry on.
Yeah, I mean, look, Evola is hard to read. Guénon is hard to read too. They both have very different writing styles. One of the biggest challenges people have with reading Evola is that he is assuming a level of knowledge on the part of his reader that most people actually don't have. He's not really writing for the beginner. He's writing for people that he considers to be his peers intellectually, who are already well versed in this stuff. So it can be really daunting to sit down and try to read his books when, first of all, like, we're all coming from this modern paradigm, and he is presenting a worldview that is completely outside of the modern paradigm. So that in itself is a bit of a hurdle for people to wrap their heads around. And you have to be able to wrap your head around that first before you can even begin to approach what he's trying to say. And essentially what he's trying to do is to chart a pathway back to this world of tradition through exploring all these common threads that run through the world's religions.
But then, okay, so this person, orthodoxy person that's saying I'm triggered. Yeah, I am triggered. You mugged me off. And second, you mugged me off, and I'll carve you a new one if you do it again. And secondly, so it really sounds to me rather similar to the ideology of religious studies, which is a branch of modern-day Christian theology. People like Mircea Eliade and all these kinds of people, where they basically say, or Rudolf Otto, where there's a kind of mysterium tremendum et fascinans, a kind of sense of mystery and ooh at the heart of life. And that all religions are an equal and equally valid response to this mysterium tremendum et fascinans. And what that worldview assumes is that there is a God, that there is a metaphysical universe, that this is eternally real. So really, it's a branch of theology.
In some ways, I wouldn't say that they consider all religions to be equally valid, but that all religions contain somewhere within them one of these facets of this primordial truth. It doesn't necessarily, like, when we talk about like what is a valid religion, from Evola's perspective, that would be a religious pathway that actually leads you to transcendence. And he would say that modern religions today do not fit that criteria, but that doesn't mean they don't still contain echoes of this primordial truth, which is what he's looking for. But you're absolutely right that there is this, it does presume a belief in God, or at least a belief that the metaphysical reality is the prime reality, whereas this physical reality is an illusory reflection of the metaphysical. And I mean, another one of the key features of traditionalist thinking would be the idea of cyclical time versus linear time, which is also something that's often hard for modern people to wrap their heads around.
Well, I haven't got so much of a problem with secularity, but shouldn't in philosophy I would expect there to be certain philosophical first principles based around, I don't know, the empirical method or logic or something like that, and for a philosophy to develop from there. And that's the history. That's the philosophy within British empiricist philosophy. This seems to be a branch of European idealism, not dissimilar to Romanticism or Hegelianism or whatever, where you take, or postmodernism, where you take certain assumptions and those aren't questioned. Those are a posteriori. Sorry, those are a priori facts. And then you develop something from there. And his assumption is that there is a that there is a metaphysical universe, and two, that religion, that there is a sort of primordial something that you can't really be articulated, that is expressed in all religions. And so I don't really understand how different that is from sort of postmodernism or any other idealist philosophy on the left.
Okay, there's a bit to unpack there. So the idea that it's postmodernism is, postmodernism kind of in some ways accurately pinpoints some of the problems of modernity. It's just that their solutions are more deconstruction. So whereas traditionalism is taking us completely out of the paradigm of modernity and saying all of modernity and the deconstruction, like that's all part of the problem. We need to chart our way back to this, this golden age in the world of tradition and that primordial spirituality and truths, the eternal truths that are reflected there. So in where postmodernism, I guess you could say, is kind of the logical end result of European nihilism, whereas traditionalism seeks to be the antidote to that. And I'm sorry, I forgot what the first part of your question was. I should have started with that instead of the second part.
It was something about Tate. So I should. No, the issue. So I understand that what they're saying is that there's this primordial religiosity, and he's saying that we will be happier if we why should we return to this primordial perennial truth that he suggests exists? Why?
Because it's a way we chart a pathway back to our divinity. Now, again, this presupposes a belief that there's a metaphysical reality, right? Oh, I remember what I was going to say about what you said. So this idea that it's not based in empiricism. I mean, empiricism itself is a very modern way of thinking. It's kind of the precursor to this cult of scientism that we see today. And I'm not anti-science or anything. Science can tell us a lot of things. It can tell us, but it can't tell us everything, right? It can tell us how much a book weighs, but it can't tell us why a book means what it means or why it means different things to different people. That's something
it can tell us why a book means different things to different people. That's testable.
I mean, you could make that argument, but to some extent, there's something that when you read a book that really speaks to your soul, right, and you kind of get that feeling, that inspiration and whatnot, it's not something that's quantifiable, really. It's, science can try to quantify it. It can try to weigh and measure these things. But to some degree, when we're talking about metaphysical principles, the more you try to pin it down with language, with empiricism and rationality, you're bringing it down into the physical. And so you're getting actually further away from the truth of it. And can you prove empirically that there's a metaphysical reality? Can you prove that with science? No, you can't. But what Evola is saying and what the religious traditions of the world say is that there is a way in which if you follow such and such a pathway that whatever religion lays out for you, that by taking that journey, you will come to a point of experiential knowing. So you don't need to have a belief in God if you've actually seen and experienced God yourself. Right, there's no longer any need for faith or proving.
Yeah, but that's the problem with it, though, isn't it? Because we can look empirically at what kind of people have religious experiences and when they have them and why. And what tends to happen is that you have a certain psychological, it depends on the kind of experience, but you have a certain, let's say it's a dramatic conversion experience, you have a certain psychological type, high in neuroticism and anxiety and things like this. These have been recreated in laboratory conditions. There was somebody called Michael Persinger who created something called a God helmet, where he stimulated the brain in such a way as to produce minor, basically a minor epileptic fit almost, really, a temporal lobe event. And these people would have religious experiences. So this is an empirically testable thing that certain kinds of people have. And what it gives them is a profound sense of truth, a profound sense of knowing, a profound sense of everything makes sense. In the same way that you can go to the Amazon rainforest and meet up with some tribe and take ayahuasca, and you will have a profound sense of knowing and a profound sense that everything is connected. You can go to Amsterdam and buy yourself some space cake and have a profound, once the paranoia wears off, have a profound sense of knowing and a profound sense of whatever. But that doesn't mean that that this is something that is outside of your mind. It's just a feeling that the circumstances combined with your genetics have induced.
Yeah, I think Evola and all spiritual teachers would probably disagree with that. It is true that you can artificially induce these feelings of religiosity and spirituality, but it's kind of like the difference between someone who takes DMT recreationally and is like, oh, I saw space elves, and it's like entertainment for them and they like the feeling that they get. There are emotions that are triggered with this, sure, but they're lacking any kind of like doctrinal foundation through which to interpret it, and they don't know how to find a pathway to that experience without using those artificial inducements. And what real spirituality tries to teach you is how to get to that place on your own through the hard work. And in many cases, you could argue that it's the journey of learning to do that hard work which produces an ontological change within yourself that brings you closer to divinity and further away from your animal nature. It's the process of asceticism and that heroic overcoming of your internal self. And this is really kind of the, probably getting a little bit closer to the core of what spirituality is about, is this sense of victorious and heroic overcoming, and you're not going to get that with an artificial experience.
Well, that's the thing, that what occurs to me is that with these non-drug related experiences, I mean, what you're really talking about empirically is a kind of hypnosis. And I've done it myself to myself. You can self-hypnotize yourself such that you have a religious experience. And it can be quite a convincing religious experience. I once presided over a séance in the cellar of a haunted castle in northern Latvia. And I got through hypnosis these three female undergraduates and myself to genuinely feel like we were contacting the ghost of a soldier who had committed suicide in that very castle. It really felt like we were doing it at the time. It really felt real. We had a Ouija board and it really felt real. Afterwards, of course, once I had actually, it was the first time I'd hypnotized people, and I brought this girl around, this 21-year-old girl, too soon. I brought her around. I opened her eyes too soon, and when she opened her eyes, her pupils were so dilated they were black. It was just black. You couldn't see any iris. It was very frightening. So I put her back under and then brought her out again, and it was better. But that was very real. It seemed very real, but it wasn't real.
How do you know it wasn't real?
Because I followed various techniques, what I had learnt in this book, trance work about how to hypnotize people, and those techniques work. So unless you're saying that the god or the spirit or whatever has chosen to work through these techniques somehow, this obviously was something empirically testable and something that was induced by me. But on myself as well as on these people, and it seemed very, very real. And so, when you started talking about this, and that's what I thought was very interesting. I'm not criticizing you for doing this. I mean, I'm genuinely trying to get my head around why this chap is so popular among the conservative tradition, whatever, the right. It was all going. You went suddenly into these metaphorical terms, such as speaks to your soul, experiential knowing, ontological. That's a wonderful one. That one, heroic overcoming, and so forth. And it reminded me a little bit of how when I did my field work on fundamentalist Christian students, that's what they do, because they for them it's so real. they start using this language, this metaphorical language about the wonderfulness of God and whatever, in the absence of a sort of logical case. That's what it became, poetic language rather than logical argument. Whereas until that point, it had been quite logical, coherent argument.
Well, I think that goes back to what I said, that the more you try to pin down these experiences with concrete language, the further away you get from the truth of what their essence really is, because it is actually just something that has to be experienced and felt. It's not, you have to kind of break out of that demon of dialectic and the constant cognitive analysis of the brain that wants to always analyze and judge and process. It's kind of like, if you go and learn Vipassana meditation, one of the things they teach you is to just, not judge the experience, not analyze the thoughts that come up, to just let them be, to be equanimous with it. Because as soon as you start analyzing the experience you have, you lose it. And so what people tend to find is that when they are doing meditation, they'll have like a few seconds where it's exactly what they imagined it would be. And then immediately the cognitive mind starts kicking in and analyzing the experience, and then they're pulled out of the experience. And so I think it's much the same thing when you try to talk about these things with language and rationality, and because you're trying to pull something metaphysical, something that's not physical, it's beyond the physical, and you're trying to pull it down into the physical realm and measure it according to the standards of the physical. And it doesn't work.
But when you get, I think it was Stanislav Andreski that talked about magicians dressed up in the robes of science or in the robes of scholarship. And so you get these people, these postmodernists and this sort of thing. And really, they're not interested in logic or reason or empirical evidence at all. They are ideologues. But because we value rationality and logic and whatever, they are dressed up in the robes of science. That's what these postmodernists are. That's what these anti-science scientists are. Adam Rutherford, people like Angela say, these kinds of people. But it strikes me that what you're talking about, it's like essentially kind of like mysticism, or just sort of religion, really, a traditional religion, somehow dressed up in the robes of science to make it seem more palatable to a modern audience than it otherwise would be.
Well, I think we have to be very careful to distinguish between religion and spirituality, because they're not necessarily the same things. There is an overlap, but in most cases, religion is an ideology. It's a set of dogmas. It's a set of beliefs and faith, but without the experience necessarily. And this is, in the modern age, especially typically what religion means. It means you believe this because your holy book or your priest told you to believe this. And there's this like very rigid way of thinking, a closed-mindedness and an unwillingness to even entertain ideas that are outside the framework of that religious dogma. Whereas spirituality is something that should ideally be free from dogma and something that is not exclusive to one religion. Spirituality is more about that transcendent experience rather than a rigid set of beliefs. So I personally don't like to use these words interchangeably. And
well, that gets me back to what I was saying about religious studies. That's kind of what they're saying, isn't it? They're saying that it doesn't matter what the set of beliefs are or who the Messiah is or whatever. There's what Rudolf Otto, that looked a bit rude. What Rudolf Otto was. I'm sorry.
It's just my lip balm addiction. I'm a woman. This is what you get when you have women on your channel. I hope you've learned your lesson.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It was very inappropriate. I can't promise I won't do it again.
Oh, you little minx. But anyway, the point is that this is a serious minute. Seriously, this is a serious channel. But so it's
so serious. I'm ruining your show. Oh no.
No, let's take that up. No, let's take up that little burst of laughter there, because people have looked into. I forget, there's some woman, some Norwegian sounding name, and they've looked into the philosophy of laughter, the psychology of laughter, the metaphysics even of laughter, and this idea that it is a breaking free of constraints, that it's comparable to almost like a religious experience, and that's why it's so dangerous. That's why the people in power hate laughter so much. That's why they have no sense of humor, because it's some breaking free, it's some moment of lack of control, and the religious experience is a bit like that, whether you conceive of it empirically as the person is so stressed that the calming system breaks through at the point of heightened arousal, causing them to over-detect agency. They see something, they think it's God or something, and then this sense of joy floods in, or vice versa. They're so calm, they're instinctive, and then the sense of arousal floods in. Or if you see it in metaphysical terms, it's this loss of the normal structures of the world. But my point is that that's what he's saying, Rudolf Otto, with Mysterium Tremendum et Fascinans. He's saying that all religions are responding to this. This fundamental sense of awe, of power, but let's go back then to. But what I mean, that's something that Gwenon is. He would say that. Otto would say that. Schleiermacher would say that. Various other people, they'd all agree on that view. So, but what is very specific about Evola? Ed has it all twisted, says WhipJ41. Okay, what is it specifically about Evola that makes him distinct from Gwenon or Otto or other people like this?
Evola's a little bit of an anomaly within the traditionalist school, and the biggest reason why is actually the subject of the next Revolt Against the Modern World episode. And in a nutshell, it is a disagreement between him and primarily Gwenon, and also everyone who sort of follows Gwenon, over whether or not the priestly caste or the warrior caste has primacy. And there's, you know, a whole ball of wax wrapped up in that and why it's significant. But that's, you know, Evola really prioritized this active warrior principle, and believed that this was really the natural soul of European people. And part of the sickness of the Western world is that we've been under the thumb of a spiritual tradition, a religion, really, that is more of a priestly and clerical nature that isn't really in line with the sort of European biospirit. So, you know, Gwenon, you know, he went and became a Sufi Muslim. He chose that tradition. You've got, you know, Kumaraswamy, who comes from the Vedic tradition. Shuan also became a Sufi. Like, there's this one thing that I don't particularly like about a lot of traditionalists is this overemphasis on Islam. And I understand that Sufism is, you know, still a strong esoteric tradition, and that I can understand why people would be drawn to that. But I think there's too much of a tendency to emphasize that way of thinking, which, you know, it's very Abrahamic, and it's not really in line with what Evola thought about the world.
Isn't there this idea, I think, that Gwenon argued, that that once something is kind of sufficiently mocked and it's lost its, if these individual religions are a sort of a receptacle for the Mysterium Tremendum et Fascinans, a baton for the Mysterium Tremendum et Fascinans that are passed on, then once they are dropped, to carry on with that metaphor, then that's it. It's over. And so once Christianity or Protestantism or something has been ruthlessly mocked, then it's lost its mystery. It's lost its power. And he was arguing that Christianity is in that position. Islam isn't, and so therefore Islam is the way forward. You have quite a bit of a movement now among traditionalists. I had Robin Riley on my channel. She's one of the few. We're not allowed to call them women anymore, are they? She's one of the few menstruators that I've had on this channel, and she's converted to orthodoxy, and orthodoxy seems to be something to which a lot of traditionalist people are moving, because in the West, at least, it hasn't cucked, it hasn't lost its connection, it's stayed firm, the baton hasn't been dropped. And that's kind of what he meant, I think. Most of paganism, which perhaps you're implying with your music and stuff that you do, that we should go back to. That kind of has been dropped, hasn't it? That battle.
I mean, and I say this with all due respect to any Christians in the chat, because I don't dislike Christians, but Evola would consider Christianity to be a plebeian Kali Yuga religion for a number of reasons that are probably a little bit beyond the scope of this discussion. But, you know, you can say, oh, orthodoxy is based, orthodoxy hasn't cucked. But the fact is that orthodoxy is still Christianity, and it's still a Kali Yuga religion. It's still a plebeian religion that emphasizes a sort of universalism and egalitarianism that is anti-traditional, because you know, the traditionalist view is that there's a hierarchy, there's a certain aristocratic nature that comes with being one of these, you know, differentiated men that Evola describes. And this is antithetical to Christianity. Now, can you find facets of this traditionalism within Orthodoxy or Islam? Sure, because they're still, you know, they're legitimate religions. They do have a strong tradition. They have a culture of symbolism within them that, you know, maybe some of these symbolisms have their meanings have been lost somewhat, but it's still there, and you can still go into these religions and you can still find some aspect of truth, and you can still find some meaning in that. So I don't blame people for being drawn to that, but I don't consider it to be traditionalist. And I'm not saying that like European neo-paganism is traditionalist either.
Okay, so what is traditionalist then? How do you follow this? Do you follow this philosophy yourself? And if so, how do you do so?
Well, as I said, Evola's position is that there are no religions left that are suitable to convey traditionalism. You know, Guinan thought Sufism was it, but Evola disagreed. You know, the Vedic tradition is very inaccessible to Westerners and has itself been corrupted in many ways. Evola kind of took a view that because of the loss and degradation of these mystery traditions, which would have provided an initiatic pathway, and he, you know, initiation is what you need in order to make that contact with the transcendent and to spur that ontological change in your own being. And without that, you're just practicing basically a devotional faith, which is a very lunar type of spirituality rather than a solar type of spirituality. And he thought that the only way forward in the Kali Yuga was a type of self-initiation, to produce that ontological change in oneself through some kind of heroic self-overcoming, as we talked about. And he did a lot of work in kind of trying to figure out what that pathway might be. Whether or not he was successful, I mean, I would imagine he would say that he was not successful just by virtue of the fact that he ended up in a wheelchair, and his worldview was that anybody who was defective in mind, body, or spirit could not achieve full transcendence.
Oh, I see. So what does this mean, this self-overcoming? What does that mean?
It is the conquering and transmuting of one's lower nature in service of one's higher nature. So I guess a good way of explaining that. So I don't know if are you familiar with the Bhagavad Gita at all? I don't know how familiar your audience might be. Right. So I'm doing actually a series of weekly streams on the Bhagavad Gita, and the idea is that, you know, Arjuna he's a warrior, he doesn't want to do his duty, and Krishna is basically explaining to him basically all of cosmic philosophy and ultimately why he has to fight anyway. And there's this idea behind it that you have to conquer your fears, your cravings, your aversions, your lower nature. You have to learn to act with non-attachment to the fruits of your labors. And you do your duty because it's your duty, because it's pleasing to God, because it's what you're here to do. It's your dharma to fulfill. And most of us exist in a state where our motivations for doing anything are whether or not it increases our pleasure, reduces our pain, or gets us some material advantage in life. And that's the lower nature. So the idea with this self-overcoming is that you need to be able to conquer that within yourself and achieve this sort of Olympian virility in your life where you can act without being motivated by these more profane things. You're motivated because it's the right thing to do, because it's a divine thing, because it brings you in line with God. And you do it regardless of what the outcome of that is. It's a sort of asceticism, but Evola is promoting a really active form of asceticism, which, as I said, is more like in line with the warrior nature than a monk.
The other thing you mentioned, which we didn't look at, was his view of cyclical time, and I'm quite into. I quite like. I've written a book now on intelligence declining. I've got a book coming out soon on collapse of civilizations. I'm quite interested in the notion. I think that certainly civilizations are cyclical, and this is one thing that Hinduism absolutely gets right. And although there's hints of it in the Bible, it's only hints.
This is one of the big problems with Abrahamic spirituality, is that it does take this linear view of time rather than the cyclical view of time. You know, in the beginning, the world, the universe was created, and eventually there's going to be an end, and then that's it. And the cyclical view is that, you know, the cycle starts with a golden age, and from there, the quality of life and the spirituality of mankind degrades. Even the earth becomes more densely materialized as we reach the Iron Age or the Kali Yuga. I believe it was said in the Vedas, I think it was actually John Morgan that told me this, that magic becomes more difficult in the Kali Yuga because even the fabric of the universe down to the quantum level is becoming more unstable as the universe disintegrates. And so each cycle then ends in a cataclysm, a new golden age dawns. But the modern view of time is, of course, linear. It follows this Abrahamic view, the definite start, the definite end, and that's it. And it requires that a belief that humanity is only ever progressing upwards and constantly improving. So it's very simple.
It's interesting that if you look in the book of Genesis, for example, there's clear hints. They talk about, you know, the great ones of the time before, the men of renown, who used to breed with us. There's this clear cultural memory of some great lost sort of civilization, I think.
And this may be due to the fact that Christianity is in many ways a mishmash of Semitic and Hyperborean belief systems that all kind of got commingled together. But, you know, this linear view of time is really subversive because it doesn't leave any room to believe that humanity could be in a fallen state or that it's suffering from an involution or a devolution, but we have to believe that we're the most evolved form of man ever to exist. Now, the reason that this is a problem is because then there's an inevitable question that we have to ask. What are we progressing towards? And this is an answer that the left and progressives, I should just say progressives, because a lot of like so-called right-wing people subscribe to the linear view of time too. What is the end goal of this progress? And the answer to that is really transhumanism. So we're about to discover that in the mind of progressives, the perfect man is actually a robot. You know, higher man used to be somebody who was spiritually evolved, not technologically enhanced. So it tells you a lot about the mindset of progressives, that they think that the opposite of the state of animal is the artificial man rather than something that's divine and godlike.
Yes, but I mean, presumably the traditionalist philosophy is saying that you should take some dogma, i.e. that there's this perennial sense of metaphysics or something like this, and even though you can't logically demonstrate it to be the case, you should just accept it. And presumably you should well, you can't prove it to be the case, so they're saying that that's the founding thing. You have to accept that.
No, it's not asking you to accept it as a belief at all. It's not. It's not a proselytizing belief system.
It's not proselytizing, but it's not proselytizing. I'm not saying it's proselytizing, but it's saying that you need to accept this, and if you don't accept this founding thing, then we can't really discuss with you any further. You have to accept this.
Well, there has to be some basic agreement on what the nature of reality is, of course. Right. But it's not saying that you have to accept this. It's saying, here's the path. Go out and seek it for yourself and have the experience yourself. And when you have that experiential knowing, there's no need to ask for a belief.
That's very similar. That's very, very similar to what my fundamentalist Christian subjects said during my field work. If you just experience God, Ed, then you wouldn't be asking us all these silly, impertinent questions about how often we masturbate or whatever. If we masturbate.
Well, look, I don't think it's there's not a problem with asking questions about this. But the thing is, because I've spent most of my adult life probably as an atheist. So I understand this point of view. I understand this very rationalistic mindset. But, I wanted to set out to understand what the traditional world thought about these things. And because you can't argue against it if you don't understand it. You need to fully understand it. Otherwise, you're just having an argument against a straw man. And so I set out to understand what the traditional world thought. I set out on the journey of learning, and I didn't have any particular desire to believe in anything. I just wanted to understand. And it was through the process of trying to understand that I came to accept it as true, that I had my own set of experiences that are outside of any dogma or belief system that just, it just resonates in my soul as being.
Yeah, I remember when I was doing A-level Christian theology when I was 17, and there were various arguments for the existence of God with which we were presented. Some were superficially logical, like the cosmological argument or the teleological argument. One of them was, if you really contemplate it deeply, you will realize God exists. And if your counter argument,
I'm sorry, you cut out there in the middle of that.
If you really contemplate, can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Remember, it's you that's in the wilds, not me. Well, to be fair, northern Finland is the wilds. So, contemplate it deeply, then you will realize God exists. To which you counter argue.
I did it on purpose.
You did. This is a family channel.
Get your mind out of the gutter.
Family, no, not me. It's not me. It's not me. This is just you. This is a family channel. But anyway, no, it's not a family channel. That's a lie. But anyway, the point is that
this is how women lead men into the abyss.
They do. They lead us astray. That's what happened in the Book of Genesis. I mean, that's what the Book of Genesis is right about women. They come up with the apples and the
lip balms and water bottles.
Yeah. You know this book I've got. It's the Book of Genesis illustrated by R. Crumb, and it's just pornographic. I mean, you should see this stuff. But anyway, look, we're moving on here. So what we're talking about. Yes. So the argument is what one would call an appeal to intuition, which is a basic philosophical fallacy. So I'm saying that you've got to start off with this traditionalist philosophy. It strikes me as a little bit like when I did my theology degree, you have this thing, practical theology or systematic theology. And the way that worked was that you accept certain things, you accept certain dogmas, you accept those, and then you reason from there. So people would do master's thesis on things like, should Christians read Harry Potter? And this is really cutting edge stuff. And they would say, so first of all, you've got to define what a Christian is. And obviously you're defining it in terms of your own denomination or whatever. So really the question is, should evangelical Protestants read Harry Potter, or should, Catholics read Harry Potter, or whatever? And I'm saying that traditionalism is doing something quite similar. Someone in the chat, Kant in the chat, said it's basically metaphysics is basically it's like religion. It's basically religion dressed up as philosophy. It's the same thing. It's certain fundamentals, and you reason from there. Whereas what philosophy is supposed to do is have fundamentals of reason, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. So Evola actually explains this in the foreword of Revolt. Let me just grab that quickly here. I've already got it marked.
I'll show them the rude book while you do that.
I thought this was a family channel.
No, it's too late at night to be a family channel. And get the general idea. Oh, this is particularly rude. Anyway, right, got it. Yes. Ready?
Let me bring this show back to something more wholesome, shall I?
Yeah.
All right. So, in the foreword, Evola explains what his method is. He says, in the course of this book, I will refer to various Eastern and Western traditions, choosing those that exemplify through a clearer and more complete expression the same spiritual principle or phenomenon. So he's looking for a common thread in these different traditions. The method that I use has as little in common with the eclecticism or comparative methodology of modern scholars as the method of parallaxes, which is used to determine the exact position of a star by reference to how it appears from different places. So again, looking at these common threads and taking note of the different vantage points that they each have of the same metaphysical truth. Also, this method has as little in common with eclecticism, to borrow an image of Guénon's, as the multilingual person's choice of language that offers the best expression to a given thought. Thus, what I call the traditional method is usually characterized by a double principle. Ontologically and objectively by the principle of correspondence, that is the sort of as above, so below principle of Hermeticism, which ensures an essential and functional correlation between analogous elements, presenting them as simple homologous forms of the appearance of a central and unitary meaning. And epistemologically and subjectively by the generalized use of the principle of induction, which is here understood as a discursive approximation of a spiritual intuition, in which what is realized is the integration and the unification of the diverse elements encountered in the same one meaning and the same one principle. So he's really setting out here at the beginning that he's not taking an empirical method.
Like I've understood you. You've been quite clear. That's word salad.
It comes across as word salad, and he could.
Derrida. That's like reading Derrida. Fuck him. This is
why I made the Revolt series, because like I even actually take that paragraph in the first episode and break it down, because it's so important to understanding his work. And yeah, he could phrase it a little bit better, because basically what he's saying is that he is not relying on empiricism. He's relying on a spiritual intuition, because this is not a subject that we can be empirical about. And part of the reason for that is that the stuff that we're grasping at is, one, not present in the physical world, it's metaphysical. And two, we're looking for a thread of a tradition that is so far gone that even as far back as the antiquity of recorded history, we still only have echoes of this tradition. And so we have to
say it like that. Then don't try.
This is why I'm here.
No, you shouldn't have to be some like interpreter of Evola, like as if Evola is the oracle at Delphi on drugs, and you're the priest interpreting him. It shouldn't have to.
Well,
happen.
I mean, you might have an easier time reading Evola if you're like slightly tripping or something.
Well,
it's a good help.
No, I don't find that being on drugs helps me to do any of my research, to be honest. No, I like coffee. That's what helps. But no, I don't. I'm not having that. Ever that is willfully verbose and willfully opaque, and I'm not having that. Julius Evola is opaque. He's verbose.
Keep in mind though that his view is that this information is not for everybody. He's an elitist. And he doesn't think that this is information that everybody needs to have access to. So there is there's kind of a barrier that built into this, that you have to really want to understand this in order to plow through this and make sense of it. The casual reader is not going to be able to understand it, and therefore the casual reader shouldn't have access to this information. And that's kind of the point of view he's coming from. Yeah, it can come across as dilettantism. I can completely understand that. And you know, as the modern world has marched on, people are not used to reading at the level that they were even in his time. You know, the average person now would struggle to read like just a classic novel.
I can
Whereas,
read Victorian. There is good Victorian writing and there is bad Victorian writing. It's not a matter of not knowing what the words mean. It's a matter of bad style. And as for the person in the chat who has said that he's not writing for English speakers, what are you saying, that Italians like bad writing? I mean, that's insane. There's either good writing or there's bad writing. Anyway, look, I'm going to move on now because we're about halfway through. And so if you're new to Jolly Heretic, I'd like to say hello, 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 and welcome to this edition of the Jolly Heretic. We are an online public house that meets on Mondays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. UK time, 2 p.m. New York, in which we discuss based science and based research of various kinds that is increasingly excluded from our woke joke universities. And on Mondays, normally you send in questions for me, which is most kind of you. And on Mondays, I research those questions in detail and I answer them. And then on Thursdays, I have a jolly interesting guest. And our jolly interesting guest today is Philosophy Cat. And Philosophy Cat has a channel which she talks about philosophy and things like this, and particularly traditionalist philosophy, and in particular the works of Julius Evola, which we have been talking about for the preceding 45 minutes, which I think has been jolly interesting. I've learned a lot about it because I haven't read his works. If I'd read his works, I'd have learned bugger all about it. But Philosopher Cat seems to have some sort of ability to understand what he's talking about or plow through it, as in her terms. And so that's been jolly interesting for me. If you have any questions for Philosopher Cat on the issue of traditionalist philosophy, then of course send them in. Is Margaret watching? Says Pink Elephant. No, I don't know where Margaret is. No, and Margaret's my cat. No, and but anyway. Yes, then send them in, and we will, of course, answer them today. So someone's saying I would be hilarious on Tucker Carlson. I was watching Tucker Carlson earlier, actually, about this libs of TikTok thing. That was jolly interesting. So anyway, so I'm now going to turn to some of the questions which you have. If you read the original hand, it would be easier. Trust me, Ed. Says ortho proxy doxy. I won't have that. A good translator should be, it shouldn't matter what someone once said to me that, if I said a Hegel, what a load of bollocks, turgid, verbose crap. And they said, you should read it in the original German. No. If something's logical and coherent, you should be able to translate it into Greenlandic and it should make equal sense. You cannot say, that's the problem with Derrida. You can't translate it because it's not logical. It only works in French because it's a series of puns. Anyway, so I'm going to now move to the questions which have been sent in. And the first question we have is from Mr. Yao Escudo. Thank you, sir. And he says, why does Philosopher Cat believe hypergamy is eugenic? It seems to be the exact opposite and civilization destroying. Women can't be trusted to pick their own mates without societal patriarchy.
Well, I guess if that's his opinion, he's welcome to it.
Explain to him why he's wrong.
I mean, this comes from a Twitter debacle. And what I found is that the main source of disagreement here is really a misunderstanding over what is meant by hypergamy, and everybody seems to want to use their own definition. Whereas the MGTOW red pill crowd wants to define hypergamy as a woman who is endlessly just trading in one partner for the next. That's not actually what hypergamy means. Hypergamy simply means a woman marrying at or above her station, which is, when she's married, that's monogamous. Why? Who doesn't want to get the best partner that they can possibly get? Why? Who wants to have children with somebody who's going to give them sickly, weak children? Nobody wants to do that. So the fact that we always try to seek out the best mate that we can get, how is that not eugenic? How is that not trying to pass on the best possible genes to your kid? And when we're talking about marrying, that's a monogamous relationship. It has not, this idea that hypergamy is about trading in your partner is a definition that arose exclusively within the MGTOW community and has nothing to do with the actual anthropological definition of it. So if people want to use the MGTOW definition, fine, but that's not what I was referring to.
Okay, I've got a couple of things to say, but I forgot to read out the poems that have been sent in your honour, Philosopher Cat.
Oh dear,
so
I can't write.
Our poet,
Excuse me,
poet at the Jolly Heretic House, Mr. Quinn, has sent in some poems to be read on today's addition. He says, our guest is a great fan of Evola, who in many ways was a great leveler. A true right-wing thinker, not much of a drinker, certainly far from a reveler. And he also says,
pretty good.
Yes, he is very good. The dissident right's mostly male, which for some can make things quite stale. But Ed's guest, I've heard, is a good-looking bird. Therefore, the evening can't fail. Thank you very much, Mr. Quinn, for the poems that you, or the limericks, as Mole Manor, forever is saying. The counter-argument to what you're saying is that at the level of groups, well, it's this: women are evolved under a condition of patriarchy, and so under those conditions of patriarchy, the family are trying to direct them towards marrying somebody that's in the family's genetic interests, not the woman's. And so then the woman has to react against that by strongly pushing for, you know, hypergamy or whatever she wants, and an accommodation is reached. And so if you take away the patriarchy, then the woman has this inclination to push very strongly in a certain direction, but it becomes maladaptive. She will, for example, trade genetic similarity, which helps to create a bonded relationship, for simply hypergamy, and she will marry very strongly up. And that's bad for her, because if you marry very strongly up, then the man can just mess around with you. There's no one to protect you. He can.
But depends. It depends on what we're defining as marrying up. Like,
well, marrying up would be marrying somebody whose social status was higher than yours.
And in the modern world, that tends to mean people who have a lot of money or power. But it's a very simplified view of how women choose partners. And I found that it does not matter how many women tell these guys, however many times, until we're blue in the face, that this is not how women choose partners, they still don't want to believe it. So I found that it's just kind of a fruitless discussion.
Is how they choose partners. I mean, I did it on, even if you base it on the nationality of partners, I did it in Finland, and we coded all of the multicultural marriages in the year 2013 for the wealth of the nation. And we found that disproportionately...
Why only multicultural marriages?
Because this is important. Because marriage between a Finn and a foreigner. Because what we found was that the Finnish women disproportionately married men that married foreigners from countries that were richer than Finland, and the Finnish men disproportionately married women from countries that were poorer than Finland. So that's hypergamy in action at the national level. And you've frozen. You've unfrozen again. So that there's a lot of evidences. I mean, women can make trade-offs. I mean, for example, if they've got, so you get some women are sexually selected like older men, because in prehistory older men would have higher status, and so, you know, and so you might get someone that is really, really attracted to old men and trades oldness for status, but this is generally how it works, unless the women are sort of fast life history strategists and want someone that's really tough and whatever. But then that's an anomaly.
Well, look, I'm not an expert in that subject. I'm sure you probably know more than I do, but I mean, the biological fact remains that if women are going to have children, they do need to be with a man who can take care of the child, who has the resources to do that. Some women obviously just don't want children and want to pursue other material interests that require a lot of money. But
maybe that's the thing.
It reduces.
They don't want children. They don't want children because if you get these women that have PhDs or whatever, and they're evolved to sexually select hypergamously, but there's no men above them, and so the result is that they become, lesbians.
Well, I mean, I suppose lesbianism is a form of, Amazonian rebellion against the solar principle. But the fact is, I mean, women do place a lot of emphasis on personal compatibility with a partner, but that is a big factor in it. It's not the only factor. Of course, if you have a woman who wants kids, yeah, she needs somebody who can provide for the family that she can count on and depend on while she's pregnant and raising these babies. But if you've got these women who don't want kids, and what's their end goal in life? Usually to increase their own material wealth and their own station in life and have a comfortable life, which again is going to compel them to seek out somebody who can provide that, or it's going to cause them to want to pursue a career where they can provide that for themselves and not have to rely on a man to do that. But I don't necessarily see that this, it's just a biological fact, and to sort of portray this as being something dysgenic.
Sorry, my phone's making a noise. My phone was too close to my. I should emphasise that I was supposed to be interviewing Philosophic Cat about a month ago or more, 2 months ago, or whatever it was, but we had to cancel because she lives in the middle of nowhere and there was no internet or something. So I'm quite pleased that there's apparently we're running off a generator here. Apparently we're doing well. That there hasn't been it's not like the Nick Fuentes interview where everything just collapsed into insanity because my internet's not working. But there you go. Good. So good. I think that's a reasonable answer. Okay, the next question comes from RCW, and he says, "Can I ask Kat's ancestry? She looks German to me."
Mostly German, just a lot of Central Nordic ancestry, Scandinavian, some Anglo-Saxon, a little bit of Hungarian. So, according to 23andMe, anyway.
Yeah, I was wasted money for me. 23andMe, it was just 100% English. You know, I knew that. Well, no, 100% British. There was a bit of Scottish, bit of Welsh, bit of Irish, but 100% British. 0.3 Cypriot trace ancestry. That's just coincidence. I'm obviously not related to people.
Yeah, for me, I have really good genealogy kept on one side of the family, but not as much on the other. And so it was interesting to find that out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yes, good. So the
100% Ubermensch confirmed.
Yeah, well, that was confirmed. Yeah, I can trace my family tree in the direct male line back to Rollo the Ganger, first Duke of Normandy, and then from there his ancestors, and that ultimately gets back to some Thori, King of Finland, in some made-up mythological line. That's my claim to being King of Finland, that I am descended in the male line from a King of Finland, and I live in Finland. So I throw my hat in the ring for the kingship of this country. Yeah. Okay. The next question comes from Washability, and he says, "One does not simply read an Evola book. If you start with Revolt Against, Ride the Tiger, or Men Among Ruins, you will have a bad time. You must read The Path of Cinnabar and The Bow and the Club first to have the tools to read Evola." What do you think of that?
I disagree with that. I mean, people can read whatever they want to read first, and whatever book calls you to read it is the one you're going to have the most luck getting through, rather than one that you weren't that excited to read. But I recommend Revolt Against the Modern World first, because it is the synthesis of his entire worldview and sets the groundwork for understanding the different topics that he goes into in his other books. The Path of Cinnabar is his autobiography, which kind of details the evolution of his thought, which can be helpful. But if you haven't actually read the books that he's referring to, you might be a little bit lost with that. The Bow and the Club is a collection of essays, which is quite readable, but I don't really think gives a good indication of his wider worldview. So, I mean, read whatever one you want first. People are going to have different experiences with it, but I do recommend Revolt to be the first one.
I must say, I don't think people should have to read other people's books to make. I mean, my books, I've written a number of books. I don't know how many it is, 17 or 18 books. And they are standalone products. You don't have to read an earlier book of mine to understand a further book of mine, because I will make a point of presenting all the information. This admittedly makes my books a little bit repetitive, because I will always have to summarize what group selection is, or the nature of selection, or whatever. But they are standalone products. And I would nice flex, Ed. What's a flex? What does that mean? Is that like an American word? I know. But anyway, I would I discovered recently that Americans don't say albino, they say albino.
Interesting.
Yeah, isn't it? There's loads of things they say different. It's extraordinary. Yeah. So the point is they're standalone products, and I think flex means show off. Does it? Oh, I thought it meant like a cable, like a. Oh, well, never mind.
I'm too old to understand the lingo the kids use these days.
You're about 5 years younger than me as well. You don't understand it, so I definitely don't understand it. So I mean, I don't understand. Ed has an 18-pack, says Seamus O'Blaine. Oh yeah, finance versus finance. Yeah, that's another one they do. Okay. There's many things that Americans pronounce wrong, or peculiar words they use. Like once I was in New York and I asked this guy, "Where's there a chemist?" He was like, "What?" And I thought, no, it's not chemist in American, is it? What is it? And I thought it might be apothecary. So I said, where's there an apothecary? And he's like, I don't know. And then it struck me it was drugstore. And it is. Okay, now the next question comes from Teddy Chinelis. Thank you, sir. And he says, we lost the demographics war. The West is, I don't know if that's related to philosophical cat, so I might leave that to another one. Nick Corkalides says, metaphysics are just less honest religion. What do you think of that?
Well, I disagree, but I can't really comment more without knowing why he thinks that.
Well, because religion is overt about the fact that it's basically illogical and it's based around belief and dogma and religious experience.
Metaphysics isn't claiming to be empirical science.
Well, it is. It's part of a philosophy department in the university. You have metaphysicians, so it's kind of claiming that it's logically. I think it is. Otherwise, what is metaphysics then?
I mean, if you want, it's its own study. Like it's not an empirical science. I mean, you could maybe consider it like a branch of like a sacred science, but that's when we're talking about a science here, we're simply just talking about a system, right? It doesn't have to be an empirical system necessarily.
But if you
I don't know what's less honest about it.
If we look about because if we look at the Thomas Aquinas's proofs for the existence of God or something like that, that's
why do you need to prove God's existence if you can just go and experience it?
I'm just saying, look at that, yeah. So that's attempt or Irenaeus in philosophy or whatever. That Irenaean theodicy, that's attempting to be logical. So it's kind of it's superficially scientific, whereas really what it's doing.
But that's a modern paradigm.
It's just coming up with ways to just. It's like Pascal said, the heart has reasons for which reason's ignorant. Really, what it's doing is just coming up with superficially logical ways to justify things that they believe. So it's dishonest in that sense. It's trying to say we're logical and reasonable, but they're not. They're not at all. They're like these modern anti-scientists. They're just coming up with ways to justify superficially through fallacious arguments what they believe for their own reasons. Whereas what religion is doing is just open about that. You know, the Tertullian, I believe it because it's absurd. They're not even trying to be logical. So that's why he's saying it's dishonest.
Okay.
What do you think about it?
I disagree, but I don't think we're going to come to any point of agreement on it.
Why do you disagree in light of what I just said?
I don't think metaphysics is something that you can drag down into the empirical. It's comparing apples to oranges. It's simply not something that's conducive to dragging down into the world of science. Science is trying to answer a lot of the same questions as metaphysics, but it's doing it from a physical perspective rather than a spiritual perspective.
Yeah, but how can you answer a question that is, even in theory, empirical from a spiritual perspective? I mean,
like what kind of a question?
It's an empirical question. So I don't know. We got this question earlier about what your ancestry was, and you said, "Oh, it's mainly German with a bit of Hungarian or whatever." That's an empirical question. That's a testable question. So, which you did have tested. The idea that you could answer that with a spiritual answer and say it's like transsexuals saying, "Oh, well, yeah."
Oh, no! I wouldn't say that.
I may be empirically male, but I don't spiritually. I'm female.
Okay, let me clarify that a little bit. So, metaphysics is not trying to answer questions that are down in the realm of physical science, and likewise, physical science shouldn't be trying to answer questions that are in the realm of metaphysics. They're two completely separate areas. There's really not a lot of overlap there. There are some metaphysical things that, maybe science can try to answer. You get down into the world of quantum physics and they start finding things that are very much in line with ancient spiritual texts and things like that. And it's really trippy. There's a branch of, one of my clients actually was telling me about a neurospirituality conference that he went to. Apparently, this is actually a branch of research within universities. And, they're trying to measure these things scientifically. so that was really, some of the things he had to say about that were really interesting, like the fact that the central hub for spirituality and compassion in humans seems to be the brain stem rather than the prefrontal cortex. And the brain stem, of course, for anyone who doesn't know, is that very primitive lizard brain, and the prefrontal cortex is where we do our more higher order thinking. And so the evidence that was kind of coming out of this conference seemed to be that the sense, like these spiritual senses, like a sense of goodness or a sense of truth, are innate in humans. They could be modeled and incorporated by psychological science. But the core conclusion really seemed to be that spirituality was absolutely fundamental to the way the human nervous system functions, and that we would abandon that at our peril. And it remains to be seen whether or not we actually even could abandon that, because it seems like religiosity is this really deep instinct in humans, and humans who abandon the idea of God still then sort of latch on to these secular religions of atheism and scientism. They still engage in a lot of religious behaviors around these ideologies. So the research seems to be suggesting that this is a sort of inescapable human need, where we have an imperative to be part of a tribe, but that tribe has to be oriented towards something. So, there are attempts to kind of bridge this gap. But I'm not an expert in it.
Someone said in the chat that I'm descended from Napoleon. That's not true, although I did used to go out with a girl that was a direct descendant of Bernadotte, Napoleon's general. Okay, the next question comes from Washability, and he says, you don't like metaphorical terms to quantify these metaphysical ideas. However, you will surely accept the metaphor adaptations randomly occur over time. That's not a metaphor. Though some not understood mechanism by which gene expression changes within environments. Well, that's a different thing. I mean, maybe I'll look at that in more detail on Monday, but that's quite clear, isn't it? That's clear what it's saying. That's not like an appeal to metaphor. I mean, that's quite clear empirically what is meant. It is reducible down to the physical. Pupil-X says, nihilist counter-argument, read W/discretion. There's no metaphysical world, there's only law. Metaphysics are concepts we use to model law. Time only seems circular because it follows predictable patterns. What do you think of that?
Well, what law are we talking about? Are we talking about the law from above that flows from these metaphysical principles, or are we talking about man-made laws that are, really quite subjective based on social and cultural norms of the day?
Yeah, I don't know. He can't. He's not. He can't really counter that. I don't really follow the question, Pupil-X, but thank you very much. I mean, time seems circular because it's based on predictable patterns, but that's kind of what. Do you mean cyclical? But that's the point, isn't it? It is cyclical precisely because there are these repetitive patterns that go in cycles. So that's how that works. This question for me, so I'll move that on Monday from Spring Skull. Narco Republican. Man does not create gods in his own image and likeness, but conceives himself in the image and likeness of the gods he believes in. Nicholas Gomez Davila. Right, what do you think of that?
I'm sorry, can you read that again? Slowly.
Man does not create gods in his own image and likeness, but conceives himself in the image and likeness of the gods he believes in. Nicholas Gomez Davila.
I guess I could agree with that for the most part.
Why?
Well, it's sort of the as above, so below principle, the idea that man is created in the image of God. There is the tendency of man to sort of anthropomorphize gods, right? And put certain cultural trappings and whatnot onto them. And that is sort of a, man creating a god in his image. But when we're talking about developing the divine aspect within ourselves, then I think it's going to go the opposite way.
Okay. The next question comes from Mike P, and he says, God exists our nervous system. In our nervous system? Our nervous system is an evolution of interacting atoms and radiation. I don't know. How does that follow that God exists because our nervous system is interacting atoms and radiation? How's that? I don't understand.
I don't entirely understand what he's saying.
No. I'd say believe in God, because if you don't believe in God, then you're contributing to the degeneracy. That you're contributing to negative social epistasis. That's my argument. That's my theodicy. If you don't believe in God, if you don't force yourself through ethical control to believe in God, then you're part of the purple-haired global homo and death cult. That's the only argument I can think of that persuades me. But thank you very much, sir, for your question. Soma TV says €33. Just here to support Professor Ed Dutton. Thank you very much, sir. That's very kind of you, and I will put that to good use. Eddie Lex says there is no right or left. There are those who use their brains to think and reason, and there are those who have forsaken their brains to blindly abide by a dogmatic Marxist ideology. Her lips are beautiful. Yes, she does have very nice lips. Are those genuine, or have you had their work done?
Just born like that, I guess.
Born with nice lips. That's a very good pair of lips to have. But moving aside from the issue,
thank you.
What do you think? What do you think of the comment that he made about how there's no right or left? There's just people that are logical and people that are Marxist. I'm not sure I agree, because I think you can have illogical people on the right as well.
A lot of people use logic to support really faulty conclusions. I mean, logic can lead you to the truth, or it can lead you further away from the truth. Some people construct really complex marble runs of logic in their heads to justify all kinds of things.
Well, that's not that's superficial. That's bad logic. That's superficial logic.
Well, he didn't clarify whether it was good or bad logic. He just said logic.
Well, it's inherent in, if you do logic as part of a philosophy degree and you get a good mark, it's logical. Whereas if you get a bad mark if it's not logical, so it's bad. It's pseudo logic. It's not good logic. It's I think that's what I would
well, I mean, look at the radical left. They're so anti-spiritual. They belong to the cult of scientism. They claim logical, rational thinking as their purview, and look at the conclusions they come to.
But that's not anymore. They're not scientists or scientistists anymore, are they? They're critical of science. I mean, they pretend they like science because people have accepted scientism. That's the thing. A lot of people are scientists, but they don't. So they have to walk this tightrope of actually they hate science because it provides them with results they don't like, and they manipulate science in order to come up with false results, like Stephen Jay Gould. They literally falsify science, and really they're just ideologues dressed up as scientists. And just they're not scientists, but in the context where you're not supposed to be critical of science, otherwise you're weird. Then they have to kind of pretend that they're into it. But okay, the next question comes from Summer TV, and he says, "See ya, €20." Thank you very much indeed, sir. People X says they have to talk with word salad since the magic doesn't work if people know the trick. If people knew the secret to initiation, for example, it will lose all effects. Masons are secretive, etc. Right. So, if I understand what you're saying, sir, you're saying that there's a sort of placebo effect involved in this philosophy, and therefore, whereby you induce people into believing that they're in the presence of a profound mind, and thus this sets off certain spiritual experiences. Is that what you're getting at? What do you think, Kat?
I mean, he mentions initiation, and it's like, well, there's a lot of symbolism involved in that in itself. Like, again, like symbolism is speaking to an eternal metaphysical truth. It's hard to pin it down exactly with language, which is why we have the symbol. You could meditate on it for a long time and come up with many different layers of meaning for it, And with the process of initiation, it's not a case of like using word salads and magical spells. It's a case of, this is the ritual. These are the steps you take. This is the experience you have. And this is the ontological change it produces in you. It's not about convincing you that you're in the presence of God. It's about changing your inner character. So
yeah. AJ Bell has commented that Dutton must learn Cat's magical ways in order to defeat the Dark Witch, Sanna Marin, and that's the Prime Minister of Finland, who's 35 years old, and take his place as the rightful king. Thank you very much, sir. So I will certainly look into that that possibility. I think Sanna knows that I am the rightful king of Finland, and she fears me. That's why she won't accept my invitation to come on this channel. Okay,
No.
The next question comes. That's not true. I haven't actually invited her. Right, the next question comes from KJ, and KJ says, "Can you, Kat? You mentioned in a video years ago that you were experiencing some serious health problems. However, you look quite healthy and indeed stunning now. Are you feeling better?"
Oh, thank you. I have a lot of ups and downs with my health at the moment. I'm doing okay. I've been better, but I've also been worse. So
dry lips.
It's you know what? As a native of the cold North tundras, dry lips are something that we're all just born with. So
no, I haven't found that at all. I found I didn't suffer from dry skin until I came to Finland.
Well, there you go, because England is very wet.
I'm adapted to an environment of rain and moisture. And here you got to cream yourself and gay things like that, or you get dry skin. And my kids have the same problem as well. My wife doesn't, because she's evolved to this dry northern environment. Okay, the next question comes from Boogle Woogle, and he says, when exactly was the supposed golden age? And also, didn't Evola view his accident helping him transcend his body and reach enlightenment? I don't think he saw it as a hindrance. He transcended his fears during the bombings.
So as to that second part of the question, I mean, I don't know what was in Evola's head about that. I would imagine he probably had a lot of mixed feelings about it, because it does, he says in the Doctrine of Awakening that, a candidate for enlightenment does have to be whole in body, mind, and spirit. And, a cripple would be considered invalid as a candidate for that. But then after having experienced it himself and continuing to want to make progress, and, you could look at it as helping you detach from the materiality of your own body, sure. Whether or not that was a bit of a cope, I don't know. And I obviously don't know what his fate was after death. What was the first part of the question he asked? About the golden age? When was it?
Yeah, when was this golden age, he asked. When exactly was the supposed golden age?
Oh, very, very, very long time ago. We're talking about potentially like the mythical Hyperborea, possibly before Earth and its inhabitants were fully materialized. There's a lot of different ideas about this, and I am certainly not the definitive expert on that.
Okay. The next question comes from Jacob. I'll read that out on Monday. Thank you very much. Tilly Chanellis, what is Philosophicat's philosophical differences with Nietzsche and Ayn Rand? Does she know what a trad thought is? How do women that follow her philosophy behave when in a marriage in 2022?
Okay, so the first question is about Nietzsche and Ayn Rand.
Yeah, how you different?
I hesitate to comment on Nietzsche because I was very young when I read Nietzsche, and I did not fully appreciate or understand what he was saying. I feel like he's somebody that I need to reread now with the benefit of the knowledge that I've got. So I'll table that one for now. Ayn Rand, I was very into Ayn Rand as a teenager and ultimately found her to be very nihilistic, materialistic. There is really nothing there to offer anybody except, material, temporal power. And there's no real self-realization that's going to come lacking that spiritual element. I mean, and ultimately you have to look at the kind of person a philosophy produces. And she and her followers were like legitimately horrible, degenerate people. So to some extent, her philosophy reflects itself in her own life. And I think that's a testament to the fact that it is not a good philosophy to follow. What was the second part of his question?
It was. Do you know what a trad thought is?
Well, people are welcome to define that term for me, and then I can say whether or not
it means a traditional that hoe over there. And how do women that follow your philosophy behave when in marriage?
I guess it depends on the quality of the man that they're married to, but assuming that the man has a solar orientation and is, properly embodying the active masculine principle, there would be a natural tendency to reflect that as the lunar sex. Whatever the man is projecting out, the woman is reflecting back. So I see you're making a face there, Ed.
Well, because you said whatever the man is projecting out, which was a bit rude.
Why is it rude?
Because it's projecting out.
I don't get it.
His gentleman sausage.
Oh my God. This is a family show.
It's not a family show. It's not a family show. But anyway, okay. Now the next question comes from our Ortpo. It says perennialism is inherently Nietzschean. It starts right off the bat, hating being sucked out of the old world of discovery. So it is obsessed with self-discovery. It is a rabbit hole for gay men.
What?
You hear that? Perennialism is inherently Nietzschean. It starts right off the bat, hating being sucked out of the old world of discovery. So it's obsessed with self-discovery. It's a rabbit hole for gay men. What do you think about that?
That's the most bizarre interpretation I've ever heard. I don't even know what to think of that.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never heard it called a rabbit hole before either.
I don't understand the connection to gay men. What?
I don't know, but if they really like a lot of gentleman sausage, then they're called hungry pig bottoms.
Is it going to upset you if I take a drink from my water bottle? Is that going to induce bad thoughts in you? Okay. You're horrible. You're a bad man.
All right. The next question from Julian Arpin, and she says, "What are your views on C. Lang?" No, that's not for me. That's not for Philosopher Cat. Seneca, I'll do Derrida on Monday. Johnny says, "If one's cosmology includes the notion of demons, how would one know that one's personal experience of God isn't a deception mediated by a demon?"
That is a very good question. I would direct you to read Iamblichus's On the Egyptian Mysteries for a lengthy discussion on that. It is a problem, and basically demons will try to appear like they're friendly, that they're benefic, that they're gods, and it's easy to fall for their tricks. The only real way around that is to raise your vibration so high that the demons are not attracted to you. So this is, I think, when you're dealing with stuff like you said, seances and stuff like that, and people are, a lot of this new agey stuff where they're trying to contact entities, a lot of those entities are demonic, and they do present themselves falsely because that's what demons do. They lie, they entice you, and if you don't have the spiritual capacity to understand that, to recognize that, to approach it with caution, you're putting yourself at great risk. So On the Egyptian Mysteries by Iamblichus will give you a really Iamblichus. Iamblichus. Good discussion on that.
I'll have a look at that. Okay, the next question comes from Washability. He says, "Please, in future, come back to my point with regards to the mechanism behind random adaptations." I will. I will look at it on Monday. Bonnie Prince Mafia says, "Ask her if she thinks incels should geomax or stay at home in misery." I don't know what geomax means. Should incels... I don't know what it means. Does anyone in the normal chat know what geomax means?
Yes, help us out.
You can't tell us now. What's geomax? No. Someone tell me. Hurry up. I'm going to give you like 10 seconds. Someone in the chat. Geomax. No,
we're just too old. Okay.
Well, we're not that old. I mean, we're born in the 80s. I'm thinking. I mean, it's like that's not that old. But we don't. I don't.
Oh, we tell ourselves, right?
Well, I don't think. I've learned since starting a YouTube channel. I've learned all these new words like based and LO, LMAO, and all this stuff. And R but you know, there's all this new stuff going around. It's not very traditional. And then Vultureman says a thumbs up, and I think that's about it. Okay, well, I'd like to finish now, so I'd like to thank Philosophicat for coming on. I really have learnt in a way that one doesn't learn from reading the books of Evola what Evola thinks. And I haven't really deviated much from the conclusion that it is basically postmodernism for right-wing people. But at least it was put to me in terms that were clear, that it is a sort of branch of religious studies, and there we go. So I'm very glad that she came on and told me about that, and we've had an interesting conversation. I'd like to thank her for coming on. And is there anything else you'd like to tell the assembled about before we sign off?
Well, if people want to try to learn more about Evola without having to read his book, you can start with my Revolt Against the Modern World series. I try to break it down and keep it relatively simple and inaccessible. There's Q&As after each set of 5 episodes. So I don't know, Ed, maybe you could give that a try and see if it resonates with you a little bit more. I go through it chapter by chapter. So, right. You know, we're about a quarter of the way through the book at this point. And, as I said, the next episode should be coming out within the month. And yeah, probably some new songs being released soon. And for anybody who isn't an astrology hater, I have my website up now, astrologicat.com, for that. So yeah, it's basically what I keep busy with, those 3 things.
All right. Okay. So I'll do that. I've got a long haul flight in June, so I'll download it and listen to it. I think that's the solution. Okay.
Well, let me know what you think, and if you want to complain about it afterwards to me, you can.
Yeah, I'll have you back on and give you a thorough roasting about it. Okay. Thank you, everybody. You bad simps. You're all bad simps. You bad simps. Okay. Thank you, everybody. I will see you soon on Monday, and goodbye.